Hello. Um, it's really great to be back here in person at the Center for Fiction. As Melanie mentioned, we did a couple of events in 2019. They were really wonderful with Jackie Sibley's Jury and Claudia Rankin and Brandon Jacobs Jenkins and Annie Baker. We were scheduled to do more in 2020, but of course, COVID got in the way of those. But we did do a lovely virtual event last year also with the great Paula Vogel and Heidi Schreck. Um, I love Center for Fiction and our friends here, and we really are grateful to have this partnership and be here tonight. I just want to say a little bit about Theater Communications Group. We're the National Organization for Theater, and we believe strongly in leading for a just and thriving theater ecology. There are a lot of wonderful programs that we do to serve our more than 700 theater and affiliate organization members, and we have 7,000 individual members. One of the main things we do is a national conference every year, and this year will be the first time that we're gathering in person for that in June in Pittsburgh since 2019. We provide grants. We advocate on the federal level, and we serve as the U.S. Center for the International Theater Institute. We also publish American Theater Magazine and Art Search. And then there's TCG Books, which is where I work. We're North America's largest independent trade publisher of dramatic literature. And what's really exciting about the program, one of many things, is we commit to the lifelong career of our writers, keeping all of their work in print. We don't just publish a single hot play that comes across a stage in New York. We really think long and hard before we ask a writer to come and join us to allow us to publish their work, and we're really lucky when they say yes. Because of this commitment for all these many decades, we've been publishing Tony Kushner, Susan Laurie Parks, Lynn Nottage, and Paula Vogel for more than 20 years. We also continually add new writers to our list as well, and some of the recent writers that we've brought on have been Larissa Fasthorse, Alicia Harris, Michael R. Jackson, Taylor Mack, and many others. And when working with the authors, we allow them they have total weigh-in on the design, the cover images, all of those things. So the books are really like labors of love for us and for them. Speaking of love, I've been in love with Sarah Ruhl's writing since I saw The Clean House as a one-act play back in 2000. We were very lucky then to publish her first full collection with that play in it in 2006. Eurydice will be our 8th book for Sarah. Her writing is always poetic, profound, imaginative, and completely original. I couldn't imagine another composer's music being better suited for the opera Eurydice than Matthew's. I don't know if some of you have heard it or gotten to see it, but it's gorgeous, beautifully written, beautifully composed. It's sad, but also very funny and very human. And we will hopefully be showing some footage from it tonight. But if you haven't seen it, it is apparently running on your various local PBS stations through the month of March, and it will be out in a recording by the end of the year. And it's also part of the Met On Demand's viewing platform. Just for TCG, I want to thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for its really generous support of TCG Books, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, who, in partnership with the City Council, supports all of our live programming. So now I will bring up Sarah and Matthew. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I really want to thank you for speaking with me on this occasion.
We have some practice.
We do. And thank you all for coming. And thank you for that gorgeous introduction, Kathy. I'm flashing on a memory of when Kathy was editing my first anthology, which was Clean House and Other Plays. There are 4 plays in it, and one of them is Eurydice. And it was my first book to be published. And I really wanted to have a book published before I had my first child, because it just seemed like who knows what might happen after that. and I was really pregnant with my daughter Anna, and I was sitting in a rocking chair. My back really hurt, but I was like, I must respond to these edits before giving birth. And then, this single volume is the first time Eurydice has been published just by itself, and this cover image is from the costume designer's rendering for the opera. And in terms of the labor of love part of TCG, the fact that they let us do that was also a testament to how artist-driven they are. So thank you. I thought I'd read a little bit, have a little story time, and then we'll talk and show some opera. If you haven't read the play yet, the general idea is it's based on the Orpheus myth, but told from Eurydice's point of view. She dies. She goes to the underworld. Her father's there. He's been writing her letters for a long time, and this is his first monologue. The father, dressed in a gray suit, reads from a letter. Dear Eurydice, a letter for you on your wedding day. There is no choice of any importance in life but the choosing of a beloved. I haven't met Orpheus, but he seems like a serious young man. I understand he's a musician. If I were to give a speech at your wedding, I would start with one or two funny jokes, and then I might offer some words of advice. I would say, cultivate the art of dancing and small talk, everything in moderation. Court the companionship and respect of dogs. Grilling a fish or toasting bread without burning requires singleness of purpose, vigilance, and steadfast watching. Keep quiet about politics, but vote for the right man or woman. Take care to change the light bulbs. Continue to give yourself to others because that's the ultimate satisfaction in life, to love, accept, honor, and help others. As for me, this is what it's like being dead. The atmosphere smells, and there's strange high-pitched noises like a tea kettle always boiling over. But it doesn't seem to bother anyone. And for the most part, there's a pleasant atmosphere, and you can work and socialize, much like at home. I'm working in the business world, and it seems that here you can better see the far-reaching consequences of your actions. Also, I'm one of the few dead people who still remembers how to read and write. That's a secret. If anyone finds out, they might dip me in the river again. I write you letters. I don't know how to get them to you. Love, your father. He drops the letter as though into a mail slot. It falls on the ground. In the underworld, the father walks in a straight line as though he's walking his daughter down the aisle. Wedding music. He is affectionate, then solemn, then glad, then solemn, then amused, then solemn. He looks at his imaginary daughter. He looks straight ahead. He acknowledges the guests at the wedding. He gets choked up. He looks out at his daughter and smiles an embarrassed smile for getting choked up. He looks straight ahead, calm. He walks. Suddenly, he checks his watch. He exits in a hurry. So then imagine that Eurydice dies. She marries Orpheus. She dies. She loses her memory. Her father teaches her some of her memories. And this is a monologue where she's explaining to her father what it is she liked about Orpheus. Eurydice and her father in the string room. Orpheus never liked words. He had his music. He would get a funny look on his face, and I would say, "What are you thinking about?" And he would always be thinking about music. If we were in a restaurant, sometimes I would get embarrassed because Orpheus looked sullen and wouldn't talk to me, and I thought people felt sorry for me. I should have realized that women envied me. Their husbands talked too much. But I wanted to talk to him about my notion. I was working on a new philosophical system that involved hats. This is what it is to love an artist. The moon is always rising above your house. The houses of your neighbors look dull and lacking in moonlight. But he's always going away from you. Inside his head, there's always something more beautiful. Orpheus said the mind is a slide ruler. It can fit around anything. Words can mean anything. Show me your body, he said. It only means one thing. Or maybe two or three things, but only one thing at a time. And so maybe I'll stop there, and maybe should we hear a little opera? Thank you. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the opera and the collaboration.
It's always a shock for me to hear the original version again, even though that's what made me fall in love with the story. But it only means one thing or two or three things. We changed that in the opera. It's strange. Yeah. Well, I wanted to start really by asking you, since we're celebrating a new edition of the play being published, and since you've been living with Eurydice for, 20 years at this point? Or even, I don't know when you started working on it, but about 20. How your relationship to the material has changed, whether it feels different today, and if so, how?
It does feel different, and I think, the play is a really personal play, and I wrote it for my father, who died when I was 20, and now it's been 20 years since that grief happened, and every time I, relive that, the grief is lessened. So at this point, I feel like it's part of a community of artistic collaborators. It belongs to all the people who've done the play, who've sung the play, who've composed this opera, who've made the costumes. Like, it doesn't feel like it belongs to me in this small little radius anymore. And it is fascinating to read that monologue and then hear the aria, because I'm so used to hearing it sung now, that melody's in my head so deeply.
And you mentioned that it's based on such personal material. The character of the father is, of course, modeled very closely on your father. And I was thinking, maybe For Peter Pan on Her 70th Birthday is another play of yours that does that, but is personal material maybe buried or hidden throughout your body of work, or is Eurydice kind of unique in how closely it draws on aspects of your life?
It's interesting. I mean, I think it's unique in that the mythic architecture of it allowed me to be more personal, because I had the Greek mask over it, and I think I also feel more free to write about someone who I've lost than people who are living. So in a way, For Peter Pan on Her 70th Birthday, which I wrote for my mom, who's an actress in Chicago, it's in a way like an inversion of it, because my mom's still alive. She acts and plays in Chicago. I wanted to give her a gift on her 70th birthday that she could live to see and perform in, which she did in Chicago. So it has, it similarly has material that's just taken from interviews, from life. Like, there are directions in Eurydice that go straight to my grandparents' apartment or house in Iowa. But there's not that same mythic overlay in For Peter Pan, although there's Peter Pan stuff.
There's Peter Pan.
So, yeah.
Those directions are super specific. Like, you could drive to your grandparents' house.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a poetry teacher once who put her credit card number in a poem, though, so you could be even more specific, I guess.
What happened?
I mean, maybe she left out the code,
right.
the three-digit code.
That's got to be Jory Graham.
Yes, it is, actually. Yeah. So if you want Jory Graham's credit card number. Another really great poet, James Merrill, wrote this epic in which he communicated with friends who'd passed away through a Ouija board, friends who included W.H. Auden and this amazing Greek woman, Maria Mitsotakis. And I came across this interview with Merrill where Helen Wendler was asking him why this epic needed kind of, she called it parents. Auden is kind of like a father. And Merrill responded in this beautiful way by saying, well, with our actual parents, even in real life, it's so hard to communicate sometimes. But in the case of these dead friends, yeah, you sort of needed the apparatus of the Ouija board to get in touch. But then once you'd set that up, communication became super easy and fluid, and actually you could say things across the boundary of life and death that you maybe couldn't say. So I think what I'm getting at here is, it seems that you and your father had quite a close relationship, but I don't think I've ever asked you whether it felt like it was changed in the act of making it into a play. Were there things that could be said in the play that were different? Or do you feel like it's really, that's how it was in life and you're continuing it?
Such an interesting question. I mean, I was lucky in that there wasn't much that was unsaid with me and my father, and He was diagnosed with cancer when I was 18, and so we had 2 years to kind of say the things that needed to be said. But having said that, you know, the monologue, this is what it is to love an artist, I never communicated that to him, you know. So that all does have a sense of shouting through something towards someone. And also, you know, there's some taboo between parents too. Like, you don't want to talk about certain parts of your love life with your parents. So I don't think...
Or any of it, really, yeah.
I mean, my kids don't tell me anything, as people in this audience probably know. They're very private. So it's interesting thinking about art or art and death as something that closes, but also something that opens.
Can I read this super short prose poem? I came across it recently, and it stopped me in my tracks because I was like, it is so deeply related to Eurydice. It's by Mark Strand. It's called The Mysterious Arrival of an Unusual Letter. It had been a long day at the office and a long ride back to the small apartment where I lived. When I got there, I flicked on the light and saw on the table an envelope with my name on it. Where was the clock? Where was the calendar? The handwriting was my father's, but he had been dead for 40 years. As one might, I began to think that maybe, just maybe, he was alive, living a secret life somewhere nearby. How else to explain the envelope? To steady myself, I sat down, opened it, and pulled out the letter. Dear son, was the way it began. Dear son, and then nothing.
Wow. I remember I met him once. There was a Mark Strand book about Hopper that really, I was writing Dead Men's Cell Phone, another play that TCG published, and I put an epigram in front of the play with this Strand quote about Hopper. And then on closing night, Mary Louise Parker, who played Jean, said, I have this little surprise for you. And Mark was in the dressing room.
He was there.
Yeah, and he was so charming and wonderful. And I remember my husband, Tony, met him too and said, if you want to have an affair with Mark Strand, it's okay. That's all right.
He's a poet, doesn't count.
I mean, he was very old at the time. He's like 80.
I mean, I think the reason I brought Mark Strand into this is just that, you know, that poem is so devastating because, well, I think it captures something that's maybe specific to fathers and sons, about this feeling of, dear son, and then, oh God, what can I say? I don't have the language to say that. Yeah. And what I love in Eurydice is there is this free-flowing, there's so much that can be said.
Right. Fathers and sons, yeah. Like, do you like John Mulaney's?
Sure, yeah.
I used to, like, his dad's always reading a book about World War II at the breakfast table.
And, like, don't have pictures of your kids at work because it's a sign of weakness, etc. So, I mean, I'd love to switch a little bit into talking about the adaptation process. And for me, I feel like opera is always this process of contraction and expansion, as we've talked about, that you can't have as many words, you have to focus in on fewer things, but those things often feel kind of magnified to this unbelievable scale. So I'm kind of curious, now that we've had 2 full productions of the opera, what do you feel was kind of lost and gained in translation?
I just feel like there was a distillation process that I loved.
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting just hearing back to back. I was thinking, I mean, I knew that the words got elongated, but then just hearing like houses, 4 beats or so. So even a 1-syllable word can be 4 beats long. Rises is, I don't know, 6 beats, 4, I don't know, what is it?
It's long.
It's long. And I love that there's an intense focus on the language as music. And I think that is actually how I hear language. So it underscores that for me and makes it really, and lifts that up in a beautiful way.
I'm glad you didn't feel like that much got lost.
No.
But this distillation is a nice way of putting it, because then it feels like you're getting to a concentrated essence as opposed to throwing things out. And I don't think we threw that many things out.
No, and what's great is I still have the book of the play. So, I never had to have the terror of loss. It's always tucked away in a book somewhere.
I wonder if, as we start to talk about the opera, if now would be a good moment to see the one other clip.
Yeah, let's do
which
it.
is another, this is part of Eurydice's aria as she arrives in the underworld, having just died and having just lost her memory, and she has no idea where she is or what has happened. Oh, and is it possible to turn it up a little bit? Maybe it's louder out there, but I can't quite hear.
I think my husband was with me. What was my husband's name? My husband's name? Do you know it? Oh, strange. I don't remember. It was to see his face when I died. His eyes were two black birds, and they flew to me. I said, "No, stay where you are." He needs you.
That is the unbelievable soprano Erin Morley as Eurydice, who sang the role at the Met this past fall. Whew.
God, she's, yeah.
She's just beyond.
Yeah.
So this is going to rewind the clock a bit, because we started working on this project in 2015-ish. Operas take a long time in the oven. But I'm kind of curious what your preconceptions about opera might have been before, because this is your first opera.
Yeah.
It's not going to be your last, happily.
Yeah.
But like, what was your sense of this art form before you actually engaged with it?
The biggest thing was I was worried they couldn't be funny.
I remember that.
And you disabused me of that notion. And I worry a little that they might be soporific,
Yeah.
some of them.
Well, some of them are.
But I wrote this essay once about sleeping in the theater, about how beautiful it can be when people fall asleep at your plays. You know, you just want to like cradle their heads as they sleep, and you think, what a beautiful, expensive sleep.
As Justin Vivian Bond says, you know, if you fall asleep at the opera and you wake up, you're still at the opera. No matter how much time has passed, really.
And then I read that do you know this Richter piece where he had people sleep outside the Sydney Opera House and played music for them all night long while they slept outside? I thought, I want to do that.
Was he like trying to figure out what dreams they would have, or?
He wrote an album called Sleep, and he was interested in how people sleep, and he wanted to make music that actually would help people to sleep. So that's kind of a digression. But I think I worried they couldn't be funny, and I worried sometimes they put you to sleep. So I was very happy to find that neither of those were the case.
Well, but sometimes they are, and I think that's sort of why I wanted to work with you in the first place, was because I do think there's been a tendency, especially in American opera, this sort of sense that it must be gloomy.
Uh-huh.
You know, it has to be serious, and that does not necessarily mean, you know, radically intense or boundary pushing. It just means there was this sort of odd, unspoken imperative for gloom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just sort of stopped making sense to me at a certain point. And so I thought this would be a way to kind of break. I mean, we played a couple of rather emotionally intense clips, but there are also a lot of moments of levity.
Yeah, there are other bits. And I mean, Matt, I should say, has this amazing new book out about opera called The Impossible Art. And I mean, you talk about the idea of that people have this idea of opera as imported cheese, you know, that it's kind of, that it has a certain scent to it, and you sort of break down why it doesn't need to be that, why it really can be this, just an alchemy of all these wonderful art forms put together, and that there's no reason it has to be soporific. And like our choreographer for Eurydice and our director, Mary Zimmerman, were all about kind of also finding moments of movement and joy.
Totally.
They could.
Yeah, the imported cheese thing is an image that for some reason has stuck with me, because it's like, you know, a fancy cheese is not fancy in the place where it came from. It becomes it becomes fancy through the sort of expense of
Travel.
exportation and travel. And I think that's kind of opera in America, because
Right.
it was sort of a European thing, and it was first put on by people who kind of wanted to be European and have American cities to be, wanted American cities to have a kind of European culture, which, you know, has a lot of problems as a kind of approach to culture making, but it's not opera's fault.
Right.
You know,
Right.
if you can kind of engage with it on its own terms, I think.
So like, what would the cheddar cheese be?
I don't know. Rock music. I mean, a lot of things that we've Vermont folk music, Vermont
Like
cheddar. I don't
native
know.
to us, yeah.
I mean, I have another question. I feel like we've talked so much about opera, but there are all these things that I haven't asked you. Like, I feel like in your plays, you do this thing where it feels like it's regular speech, but it's not quite. Like there's something magical about it. There's something that's just a little bit dreamlike, which I think was why I thought, oh, this could be musicalized. But having made an opera, do you feel like there is a difference in register, or a difference in the kinds of things you can say as a writer when you're just writing a play versus when you know it's going to be sung?
I think it's better not to know, in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's more freeing to not know. But I love what you say in your book about all opera is dream speech, which I think is true. And I don't know. I mean, I can't sort of analyze what it is in the language of my plays that makes it different from how people actually might talk. But I tend to actually use pretty spare, simple language. I'm from the Midwest, and there's something about me that likes the honor of a good plain word, which I think also is good for singing when it doesn't get too, too adverbial.
Yeah, you can get tangled up in that
Yeah.
when you're singing it.
And I don't know. I mean, I have no idea what time it is, but we can take questions from the audience as well at some point.
we will. I think we can switch to that in just a few. I have one more question. This is cheating because we have talked about it a little bit. But are there stories that you think could make good operas that you're dreaming of adapting?
Well, should I say what we're thinking of doing?
Oh God,
That
it's so
secret?
scary.
It's so scary?
Yes, but totally.
I think we're gonna make a King Lear together.
Whoa.
Ah.
Yeah, I think
Gasps.
it's a little bit
Exciting.
strange to me that there hasn't been, as far as I know, a real King Lear opera in English. There's an amazing German one that is just like scorched earth, heavy metal, blood and guts. Like there's no poetry in it. It is only the violence of the play, which works. There's a lot of violence in King Lear, but I sort of think we would take a different approach. And I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and what I am excited about too is there's a little fragment from King Lear in Eurydice in Matt's score too, and I don't know if you're thinking of that as a little nugget that could be a key up to the next.
I definitely think it's a breadcrumb. I mean, just the fact
yeah.
that there is King Lear in Eurydice, sort of
Yeah.
like I think it's the only other text, right, that's there. So clearly it's a portal into something.
Yeah.
It's there in the play too, right?
Yep.
I mean, and the bit in the opera is the "We two alone shall sing like birds in the cage," and of course in the play that's a very bleak moment. But if you take kind of Lear's hallucination out of context, it's very beautiful
very
and
sweet.
childlike. And so in the opera, it's set to music in a very sweet way. So I think the next time around, it probably can't be quite that sweet.
That's right. Yep, that's right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, so shall we open the floor? We'd love to hear what's on all of your minds and welcome you into the conversation.
Yeah, so if you have questions for Sarah and Matthew, you can go to Naya, who has the mic over there, and you can just form a line down the aisle.
Hello,
Hi.
and thank you for the opera. I loved it. This may not be a question that you two can answer, or maybe you can, which is, in the production, the words were projected on the set, and they would melt away, and they were different in different scenes. And I thought that that was yet another way of the ideas being expressed. We had the actual words, we had the sound of the music, and then we had this thing we could see. And I wonder if that was your idea, or the set designer, or the director?
It was Mary Zimmerman, the director. And she'd done that for a Philip Glass opera in Chicago. And I remember seeing it and loving it. And I kind of just think that's what should happen in opera, because you don't have to, look down
Yeah.
and then up.
Yes.
And I think in LA, when we did it, we didn't have the technology to kind of do it properly.
We ended up with super titles above
Yeah.
the stage, which is not terrible because you can sort of hold your gaze and see both things.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, the much vaunted Met titles on the backs of seats are a little bit the worst of both worlds, because I think the backstory of them is that, purists at the time didn't want it to be obstructing the main view so that you could ignore the text if you wanted to. But the downside is you're constantly going like this.
Yeah.
And Mary Zimmerman feels even more strongly about it than we do. And also because, as we've talked about, the words music dynamic is so essential to the story and the ability to engage with, and as you say, it melts away sometimes when language is failing.
Yeah.
It just felt kind of unavoidable.
It was just another dimension of telling the story that was, I thought, so effective. It just added to the effectiveness. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And also like a shout
was
out
the
to
way
the
it was.
projection designer, this woman, Katie Tucker, who was really artful about it. It wasn't just like throwing it up there. It was like all the disintegration of language, and it was all her.
It's pretty wizardly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I loved both of your books, and I loved the opera, and they answered, and I read them back to back, so they answered a lot of my questions, but I would love to hear you talk a bit more about the absolutely manic dance scene at the wedding, which was like one of my favorite parts of the opera and didn't show up in either of your books, and I just thought was so delightful.
Yeah. I mean,
Sure. I mean, it's a funny thing. I love the choreography that you saw in New York, but it's actually, if I can share a little bit of backstory, that choreography was based on a misunderstanding that is partly my fault. So
I don't think I know this.
yeah, it's so interesting. So, okay, orchestras are expensive. So when you're rehearsing an opera, you're mostly rehearsing with a pianist. And then the orchestra joins terrifyingly late in the game. And sometimes it feels like you've been on dry land and suddenly you're in the ocean with this huge ensemble. And the sound is completely different. And Dennis, our choreographer, Dennis Jones, had studied the piece from piano workshops. And in those workshops, all you hear is the beat. the sort of do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And so he thought, okay, it's a very straightforward dance scene. I'm just going to choreograph it. But when you hear it with the orchestra, it's chaos. And it's intentionally chaos because the sense that I wanted to create was that it's like a kind of unpleasantly crowded, sweaty party. And Eurydice's next line is, I hate parties. So I wanted to kind of create the sense that she's like, there are strobe lights flashing and she just wants to get out, So, and when Dennis finally heard it with the orchestra, he was like, oh my God, you wanted it to be chaos? And I said, yeah, I sort of did. So I think if he'd heard the real thing, it might have even turned out differently, but it was kind of so irresistible, and our singers can really dance, as it turned out. Aaron and Jakub, the countertenor, and Josh, our Orpheus. So we left it be.
And it's one of my favorite melodies where it's like, it's sort of that little 80s rock band element where it's like,
yeah,
like,
I was going around the week of the premiere in LA asking people, like, did I steal this? Does anyone know this tune? Because I'm pretty sure I wrote it, but I wanted it to feel kind of cheesy and familiar. I was terrified that I was going to get a call from like Taylor Swift's lawyer being like, don't you know this song? So far, no one has been able to identify it, which I think means I did write it. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Thank for your questions.
Thank you.
Question from Lucy.
I was wondering, so when you're writing the play, obviously it was about your father, but was there anything that you based it on or any elements you took it from? I mean, probably the original Eurydice, but you never know.
Yeah, that's a great question. Lucy was asking, in addition to the father character, what else did I base the play on? So there are a couple retellings of the Orpheus myth that are still left. There's no original play left, although there supposedly was one, but it's gone. So there's like a little bit in Ovid, there's a little bit in Virgil, so little scraps of the story. And the basic story is, Eurydice either gets chased by a shepherd or a snake on her wedding day. It depends. Like sometimes they say a shepherd kind of, abuses her in some way and captures her, or the snake kills her, bites her ankle. She goes to the underworld, and then Orpheus comes and sings his way down, and the stones weep because the music is so beautiful. And then Orpheus is told that he has to walk in a straight line and not look at her, and he does, and she dies again. So that's sort of the basic stuff we know. And then the stories change a little bit based on whether it's Ovid or Virgil, but those are the little bits I had.
You had a musician boyfriend too, right?
Well, maybe. I might have. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. I was actually going to ask something similarly along the lines of that question, but I guess I'd love to hear you both kind of talk about, I think as you called it, Sarah, the Greek mask, in creating both a play and an opera that are both modern and deeply personal. How do you feel like you've related to the Orpheus myth, as ubiquitous and mysterious as it is to the public?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's so interesting that every generation tries to crack it, and within a generation, several people try to crack it. So, there's Hadestown. I mean, so many poets have tried to write into it. And I think there's something about the opacity of it it's just enough mask, it's just enough abstraction that you can project all of your own personal history onto. And I think that's why it endures. So, it captures something that everyone has been through to some extent, whether you're on the receiving end of the loss or you're the perpetrator of the loss. What was it that you were talking about? Was it Jory Graham who said myth is always happening?
Right. There's no question of did they really happen, because they're happening in our psyches always, and that's why we keep returning to them. I mean, I think for musicians, there's also the fact that this is kind of the foundational myth of music, and it makes this grand claim that music can conquer death, which makes composers feel great. But I think the thing that I love about it is that it's not dumb about music's power. It says music can conquer death, but humans are going to screw it up, you know? Orpheus's music briefly conquers death, and then this all too human impulse ruins everything, and that feels true to me. I mean, that is our relationship to music. It can transport us to this other realm, but we're always going to be brought back.
Here's a question I've never asked you. Do you think dead people can hear music?
Oh my goodness, what an amazing question. No, I think they're maybe part of music. I think they've kind of, I think they're part of what we're hearing, but I don't think they need it.
Hi. Your play, Eurydice, is one of my favorite plays I have ever read or seen.
Thanks.
And when I heard about the opera, I knew I wanted to see it, but I thought it can't possibly be as great as the play, so I was really prepared to be underwhelmed. Well, it was so enthralling, and it, remarkably to me, it was even greater. The sum of the parts made it just spectacular. So thank you both for this beautiful work. 2 questions. There are some clues, and they're even in the clips you showed us about, I would say, Eurydice's ambivalence about her marriage. She runs away from the marriage. It's really hard being in love with an artist. And she deeply loves and misses her father. So she's got a lot of reasons to kind of run from this. And I'm curious if the 2 of you talked about what her motivation and what Orpheus's motivation is for mucking it up. You know, they have this opportunity and they screw it up. So I'm curious about that. And I also wanted to ask you, Matthew, about the Orpheus Double, which is such a wild and beautiful and original idea.
Thank you so much for those kind words. Do you want to start with Orpheus's Double?
Sure, and I think the question of the double really relates to the first part of your question of motivation. I think in the play, there's certainly a strong kind of triangle that's implied between Eurydice and Orpheus and her attachment to her father. And in a way, I wanted to create a triangle for Orpheus too, because I think he's drawn to Eurydice, but he's also kind of impelled by music itself. So I wanted to kind of embody this other force that is pulling at Orpheus, which I think that is present in the myth. I mean, my own reading, which is really, really dark, and which is not really there in the opera, my reading of the myth is that Orpheus knows what's going to happen and turns around anyway because he knows loss is the most fruitful thing for music. And, you know, I know it's horrible. It's like, but it is kind of a sort of choice that's implied. And so we wanted to, the double was the other side of him. And also, I think one thing I noticed in the play is this feeling that Orpheus is never showing Eurydice all of himself, and that's frustrating for her. It's always, what are you thinking about, she keeps saying. And so I wanted there to be this presence who I think she can feel, but she can't see.
Which I love. I mean, and I think too the otherworldliness of the sound of a countertenor, I think it's so beautiful, because how do you sort of compose the idea of this great musician? And I think the countertenor made it feel beyond human, because that sound of the countertenor along with another singer is, otherworldly and slightly androgynous, which I think is really right. And we did talk about motivation a lot. I mean, it was, Matt would be in Vermont in a cabin in a field working on a scene and say, I'm having trouble with this moment. And I would talk about the moment and what I thought it was, and he'd say, oh, okay. And he would go and write. So we definitely talked about all of that ambivalence and kind of subtext in the process.
Well, I think we're just past 8 o'clock.
All right.
So, wow.
Should we sign?
We have a couple questions. Sorry about that. We have a couple questions from Zoom. If I can ask one question from Mary Beth, which is, can you speak a little bit about your decisions around which scenes to include and which to exclude that were in the original play into the opera?
I mean, I think one thing we got rid of was some of Hades in the underworld and sort of compressed his role a little bit, just in terms of plot. And we sort of, in the second movement in the underworld, where time is kind of distended, we kind of collaged some scenes together to make time pass more quickly.
And this wasn't intentional, but I think we also cut a lot of references to music.
Yes, that's right.
Because in a funny way, they started to feel superfluous because
Right.
everything's music, so
Right.
you don't really need to talk about it.
Right.
This final question is, how did the two of you approach the adaptation process? Did you print the play and mark things you definitely want to put in, look at the text together? What did that process look like?
What did we do?
I don't know. I just kind of feel like we sent a Word doc back and forth, and all of a sudden it was. No, I mean, I think I approached you in the first place because I felt like Eurydice was pretty close to being the shape of a libretto and its scale. So your word distillation feels right to me. It was mostly trimming, weeding, you know.
Yeah, I mean, we had to kind of make a treatment before doing the opera, so we kind of talked about structure. And weirdly, even in the writing of the play, it's in 3 movements and there's a chorus. So we were really lucky in that respect that the process was pretty seamless. And I just want to thank you so much for taking time to talk about this and take time away from the music in your head and whatever you're writing. So.
Such a pleasure. And everybody who knows the play should buy this new edition, which is really beautiful and has Anna's design on it. So yeah. And I think we're going to hang out and sign books for a bit and talk, right? So I think...
like in the old times.
Yes. We have, the books are set up by the register in the bookstore, so you can just make your way there, and the signing table is right over there too. And let's give them a big hand.
Thank you.